important because we're finding more and more that because of the cost of development, we have to be developing at a denser level so that we get more units per foot of sewer or street. And so a tolerance for smaller lots, if not smaller houses, is a growing part of the market. A high interest in independent senior living. As we get into higher density situations, you'll see that 60% were favorable toward duplexes. So, and so that's really quite interesting. Or sometimes we will refer to them as single family attached. And there are a lot of interesting areas where nationally we're seeing trends in duplexes. One of the most interesting of which are people who buy a duplex, are owner-occupants of one unit, and rent out the other unit, which then in turn helps them pay the mortgage on the entire structure. So as rents get into the $1,500 to $2,000 a month range, that becomes a real possibility in terms of making housing more affordable. There was even reasonable, about half the people said townhouses or row houses were appropriate or preferable housing types in Lansing. Apartments a little bit less so, manufactured housing and tiny houses, or manufactured housing pretty much not. So, so even though this is very much a single-family city, there seems to be, at least in this sample, which is not representative, again, of anything other than people who responded to the survey, but more and more interest in some of these, what we think of as missing middle or medium density housing. So much for that. Now we get into the, any questions so far, or observations about surprises, anything that. So now we get into population. And here, in contrast to a lot of its peer cities, and we took a sample of cities that we think are a lot like Lansing, either in the immediate area, in the Omaha metropolitan area, which is where I'm from, or in Des Moines, which is where another one of our offices is, because we have similarly situated communities, including some that have a military presence as well. And Lansing, as you can see, has grown since 2000, but not at a very rapid rate, mainly because the last decade was not a very productive one. And in fact, the city's population was almost absolutely flat during that period. We have experienced something of an out-migration of middle-aged people. So again, this gets into the issue of new housing types, of housing types that cater to empty nesters and so forth, to be able to retain some of those people, as well as a need for move-up housing, where people, actually do sometimes as they get older and the kids move away, want to have everything they couldn't have when they had kids living at home. Although the age in which kids live at home has also increased. Not my kids, thankfully, but they're doing fine by themselves. But another interesting phenomenon is I drew a curve around the distribution of population 20 years ago in 2000, this is for men and this is for women, moved it up and saw this kind of weird anomaly of that curve not meeting the current distribution. Said to myself, well, why in the world is that happening? And then said, oh yeah, there's prison here. So the prison population actually is included in the census population, and it's something that we have to control for. So it's a weird little problem that we've got to think about in terms of projecting needs forward. We then get into population projections. And we looked at several different scenarios. The bottom scenarios really relate to natural population growth. So there are two factors that contribute to population change. One being migration, the other being the balance of births versus deaths. And natural growth assumes that there's zero migration, that the number of people moving out and the number of people moving in are in absolute balance. Those continue in absolutely flat population terrain. If we look at the population rate that we experienced for the first 10 years of this millennium, it grew pretty quickly and would generate a population by our target year of 2030 of about 13,700 people. If we take the 2000 to 2020 population growth rate, which is 1.1% average annual growth, which is ultimately what we're working with, that includes one great decade, one bad decade. You can't go wrong kind of combining those. And so that kind of moderate, mature community growth rate of 1 or a little bit over 1% per year is more or less what we can predict with some confidence if we have lots and so forth available. That will generate a significant increase in the amount of construction that we get in Lansing. So we're kind of banking on that.
So are those numbers, excuse me, Marty, are those numbers controlled then for the prison population?
Yeah.
The one you based?
Yeah, well, they do, because we have, and when we get into the projections for need, we just take the prison population out entirely. So we're just then looking at the population in households.
Right.
But yes, that would include the prison population and the non-household population, anybody else who's in group quarters.
I guess my point is the census data in that time frame.
Will also,
the prison population went down by 600.
Yeah.
During that time frame, so you lost population.
You lost population because of
we
that.
actually increased the city's population, but overall it was a loss.
Right.
So it said, "Hey, you guys shrunk," and we're like, "No, we didn't. We grew."
We grew.
The prison shrunk.
Yeah.
So, I just throwing that out.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah.
Absolutely critical point.
It's a very good point. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, we might want to look at those numbers again, just to make sure that that's included in there. So that's good. That's good information. When we look at now we get into median income, and you can see that that Lansing is the median household income, because this obviously does not include the prison population, and Lansing is quite high for all of these communities that are all comparable towns. So the only one that's kind of in the same ballpark right now is actually DeSoto. Having worked in DeSoto several times over the years, that's a rather recent increase that's caused by the boom that city has really experienced. When we get to housing and housing development, we're still mostly owner-occupied. The census shows a vacancy rate in Lansing of about 5%, which is pretty optimal, except the vacancy rate isn't really 5%. The reason for that is that includes a category that the census refers to as other vacants, which are basically units that are not in the market. They're deteriorated, they're being held onto, but they're not available either for rent or for sale. We take those out, and the vacancy rate is about 2.9%, which is almost nothing. Hence, we only have, when we did the last series of interviews, only 8 houses for sale, and very little vacancy in rental units as well. So 2.9% is not a good vacancy rate, just in terms of having available housing for people. And yet, as you can see in figure 216 up on the upper right, we didn't build much housing. And so even if the population slightly increased, or increased by 600 or so, that did not get reflected in the amount of development or construction that we experienced. So since 2017, we only built 73 new housing units, 45 of those single family, 14 duplex units, and 14 multifamily units, which are the new townhouses on Ida Street. It'll talk here in a minute. There we go. Now, you see that. So we've looked at the distribution of value and condition. The lowest appraised values are in the neighborhood just immediately south of the correctional facility, north of Mary Street, and the Eisenhower Road area, also east of Maine. The highest appraisals being the Ridge. The middle appraisals being the 1970s, 1980s vintage development like Carriage Hill, for example. The conditions are pretty much the same kind of thing. And then we get into these areas that show us the relative burden or lack of burden of housing. One of the indicators that we think is a very valuable one is value to income. So it's taking the median household median home value divided by the median household income. The sweet spot is actually about 2.5 to 3. It was interesting that we did a little bit of a nationwide study about the validity of that, and during the early 2000s, we saw that number going up way over 3 to 3.3, 3.4, 3.5, even close to 4, which indicated to us that there was a crash coming because people were buying more house than they could afford, and it actually did, as we all know, happened. Lansing's V over R is very low, 1.98. Again, these are based on census figures, so that's a level that we usually see in undervalued rural towns, but the situation here is that the median income is very high relative to the average value of houses. It's very interesting and really kind of an unusual phenomenon, but it's having some of the same effects on the market as rural towns have when they don't have very much in the way of precedence for higher end development. Interestingly enough, the areas that have the relatively highest percentage of burden, that is people who are paying over 30% of their adjusted gross income for housing, are in the areas between 147th or DeSoto Road in Maine and north of Ida. So some of these kind of venerable single-family neighborhoods, but they're still not very high. The interesting thing is that the places that have the highest percentage of burdened renters over on the right are the neighborhoods to the east of Main Street. When people were talking about the trend in the market of investors or hedge funds buying up owner-occupied houses and converting them to rentals and getting high rents for them, that's what we're seeing here. It's really interesting to see those kinds of numbers and observe trends actually bear out when we look at the numbers. 44% of people in that on that northeast block group are paying more than 30% of their income for housing. So interesting phenomenon there. This is a chart that takes a little bit of explaining, but it's something that people have found to be very useful in terms of thinking about housing in a community. And that is the balance between people in a certain income range and the amount of housing or the range of housing prices that are matched to that income range. So what we're basically finding in Lansing is that, and this will be not a huge surprise, that there are a lot of people who are higher income households occupying moderately priced housing units. On the other hand, there's a shortage of higher cost units relative to the number of people who can afford those units. So that's where you really dramatically see the move-up market issue and the relationship between housing not being available or affordable to new households, because a lot of the people who are more mature families are living in those units, occupying that stock, and not moving up or moving through the market. So, obviously we're not going to pick people up and say you must move into a $500,000 house, but it's a phenomenon that we're seeing. And if we had maybe a little bit more in terms of alternative units or higher end units or units for move up, we might see some of that kind of stasis in the market begin to open up a little bit. But since we're not producing very much, we're really kind of stuck right now, and you can see that pretty dramatically in this in this comparison. So, in terms of summarizing what we found, we really need to restore an attainable growth rate. We need to provide some move-up housing. We need to provide, because the market is demanding that, a greater range of housing types as opposed to just large lot single family. We need to have market rate rentals. We have a specific market, a need for older adult independent living. We need to provide better transportation, both internally and externally, in older neighborhoods to continue programs the city has already done to its credit to fill vacant lots and eliminate blighted structures, and to do this within the realm of a neighborhood development program. So now we get into what you've been very patient. Now we get into the more interesting stuff in terms of what's needed in the future. Any questions so far, or observations? And Mayor, we'll revisit those numbers just and take that factor out. We didn't know about that, so that will be. Do you know if that kind of a reduction is planned in the future?
No, it was a remodel of the prison.
I see. So they just thinned it out.
Right.
Okay. So now we come to, first of all, how many units should we aim for in to 2030? And I'll go through this calculation. So here is the population with 1.1% growth, reaching by 2030 about 12,500 people. We now take out the non-household population and leave that steady. That means that we will be housing about 10,143 people by in 7 years, based on that growth rate percentage. We leave the average number of people per household alone. The number of units that are required by demand are the household population divided by the number of people per household. The reason that we are keeping that steady at 2.88 is that we will be thinning households out, again, as kids continue to move away and we have some level of attrition, namely men dying faster than women, which reduces the household size from 2 to 1. I being an old guy, I'm not so happy about that. Well, it's fine. I'd rather go first, but that's another issue. That produces a household demand of 3,522 compared to just about 3,071 that we had in 2020. We increased the vacancy rate because the vacancy rate right now is too low. So we're suggesting that will go up by 0.1% every year. Just that increases housing demand to get up to like a 4%, 3.9% vacancy rate. We had a real shortfall of units between 2020 and 2023 in terms of potential demand versus what we actually built. So we're adding that factor in as well. So see this as being pent-up demand. Replacement need is assuming that we take half the units that got classified as other vacant in 2020, which was 109 units, and get rid of half of those over the 7-year period that we're planning for. That produces a cumulative need for Lansing of 560 units over the next 7 years to achieve that kind of 1.1% growth. And that's about how many units, not per year, but we developed totally between 2017 and now. So you can see that that this kind of very attainable growth rate within the market is going to require a really significant ratcheting up of housing production in the city. And we've got to put the infrastructure literally and figuratively in place to be able to do that. So now we go into the next set of calculations, and that is how does this split out and how in terms of what people can afford. So a lot of our projections are predicated on the idea that the income distribution of the population will be pretty much the same in the future as it is now. So we take those different income categories, the incomes will go up, but we take those and use the same relative distribution. So here for owner occupancy, we have taken the various income ranges in the city and identified what 30% of their incomes would generate in terms of ability to pay. We then reduce that by 25% because you not only have to pay principal and interest, but you also have to pay taxes, insurance, upkeep, things that break down, all those kinds of things. So the assumption here is that only about 75% of that 30% is available directly for P&I, for principal and interest payment. And then we're now assuming that a purchase price range that is based on a 6% interest rate assumption and 30-year fixed term mortgages. So we're at about 7% now. People got to me, 7% was kind of, 6 or 7% was kind of a steady state interest rate until people got really used to 2% and then thought that 6 and 7%, which is what we have now, was exorbitantly high. Those of you who were in the housing market in 1980 or trying to do projects in 1980 remember that interest rates were about 18%, and if you got anything in single figures, you were really a fat city. So the way to use this chart is that a household with an income of $75,000 to $100,000, and our median is right at $100,000, could afford with these assumptions something between $230,000 and $312,000, and that is $100,000 above the census median for median home value in the city right now. When we get into the higher income ranges, which really represent half the city, half the city has incomes above $100,000. Now we're getting into ranges that are really not being built or have not been built in Lansing. So 100 to 150,000 corresponds to about 312 to 470,000. When we get above 200,000, it gets to be about 625,000 and up. We do the same kind of calculation for rents, and so you can see how that works. So the median income in a market rate rent would be somewhere in the range of $1,800 to as high as $2,500 Again, assuming that now all that payment can be devoted to rent and related costs. So those are rents that are much higher than people are used to paying, but the rents that we're seeing in market rate development right at this point right now at about 18 to 1900, and that will continue to rise. So when we talk about rent ranges, it gets into things that those of us who are used to lower rents are finding unfathomable, but that is in fact what's going on. So now we get into the actual price points and what we think the market might produce. And these are all, as most market studies are, kind of educated guesses. So first of all, we have assumed 60%, 65%, 35% owner-renter occupancy split. Much of the country's building 50-50, but the tradition here, certainly into the near future, is going to be very much favorable to ownership versus rent. So you can see a distribution here. Some markets that we can't possibly serve with new construction that get shifted back up to higher end development. But we'll see 364 single-family units or ownership units, 196 rental units, and they distribute across the income group, given our assumptions in this way. So a major part of the production, about half of production, will be for these higher end units over 300,000 up to and over 600,000. And similarly, a significant amount of the rental market is going to be market rate and above, although there's still some market for moderate and assisted units as well. Now this gets a little controversial because we think we are finding, and it hasn't happened necessarily yet here, but in order to generate affordable housing for owner occupants, we're going to have to be looking at different housing types. So these will be things like small lot single family, duplex or single family attached, sometimes with economies of scale, but still distinguishable as single family units. A great example of that is this little project right here that's near my office in Omaha, on the edge of downtown Omaha, that are semi-attached houses with individual units with a garage in between. So they feel single family. They're more distinguishable from duplex, but they're very popular, and they're getting right now in the $350,000 to $400,000 range in that particular setting. So we're going to be looking to some degree at some of these different unit types, and then for renters, we made assumptions based on, for each one of these housing types, what might be the owner-renter split. So for example, for conventional single family, it will be 100% owner occupants and virtually no renters. As we get into small lot, there might be some 80, like an 80-20 split. In a middle density, it gets into more of a 50-50 split. And then for multifamily, because I think we're a ways off from apartment condominiums, it's going to be a 0-100% split. So the question really kind of becomes, not in terms of number of units or distribution, but in terms of whether we're meeting some element of the future owner market with medium density housing. And we think we will, because the economics are going to make that an imperative. What that means in terms of development area is that in order to accommodate the 560 units that we're talking about, we'll be converting about 116 acres to residential use, which is not a whole lot. It's about a quarter section. You double that to provide a lot of market choice, and it's still about a half section of property that will be needed over the next 7 years for designation as residential development. The clicker is so overwhelmed by my brilliance here that it's just stuck. There we go. So our goals. You're looking at me like, are you crazy? No. Sorry. No, it's okay. It's true. Okay, so we look at overall assets, issues, and goals, and without belaboring this, our primary goals are to come up with ways of sharing risk, because risk is the biggest obstacle that developers and builders face, and risk is both a waste of human resources and a waste of financial resources. And when people perceive risk, they don't build, especially when they don't have a lot of money that they're really happy to lose. So a great deal of housing policy, as we tell our clients, is trying to figure out ways to share risk or insulate the people who are making investments from risk. And it's a hard thing to sell, but it is important. By doing that, we can accomplish the second goal, which is increasing housing production and variety. And then finally, it's going to be important to preserve existing neighborhoods, because we can't replicate some of the units that are affordable that we've got. And when we think about housing that, like for somebody my age, was built in 1970 or 1980, it still seems like new housing, except that it isn't. A structure that is built in 1973 is now eligible to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So there you go. So that's changing as well. One thing that we think is a major asset, and a particularly unusual asset, is town center. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute as well. So.
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt you, but you got about 10 minutes left in your presentation.
I'm glad we have that much. If the clicker will cooperate and move back to where I wanted it to be, rather than, there. Okay. Yeah. So reducing risk is the first goal, and there are 3 areas of risk that are significant. Lot development being a very important one, and ways of ameliorating risk in lot development is by various kinds of risk sharing between public and private sectors. The problem with lots is that subdividers rarely make, unless they're in a very hot market, rarely make much money on lots. And particularly if absorption rates are slow and return is limited. So the front end exposure is high, the back end profit is low, and the market by itself doesn't work. Front end financing, some cities like Salina, as an example, use industrial development bonds and have that power under state law to help finance infrastructure development. Special assessments have been used. I don't know if you're using those here for.
Somebody had reached out to us about that for a subdivision.
Yeah. The thing about special assessments is that they make the investment in public improvements and infrastructure less risky at the front end, but they don't reduce housing costs because the buyer has to pay them off. So it's a way of kind of using a MasterCard or a charge card, but delaying the cost, which is not a bad thing to do, but it more or less pushes the cost of retiring those
Puts a
bonds
burden
off to
on
the presumptive homeowner. Yeah. We, I think, and I'll somewhat take credit for this, popularized the development of RHIDs. The issue was we were doing a housing study in Dodge City. They were getting the casino that eventually got built in Dodge City and had all of 12 lots to build the houses on that were necessary to serve employees. So the RHIDs kind of come to the rescue in terms of being a tax increment district that's specifically related to housing development. There's a process you have to go through to organize an RHID, but it is a valuable way, particularly in a market that's not doing much in the way of lot development, to get things going. So something that we would definitely recommend that you look at Lansing. And advanced site acquisition. We do this for industrial parks, but not for residential development. So sometimes it's not a bad idea to go ahead and buy good land or secure good land that complies with comprehensive plan that's there to be subdivided. Housing production is also an obstacle, particularly because this is especially significant because when builders are building things that they're unfamiliar with, attached housing, townhouses, small lots, single family, they find that risky and aren't certain about the market. So different kinds of ways of financing those to create critical mass to demonstrate a market are important. And this is where we suggest the idea of taking cooperation between Leavenworth and Lansing beyond economic development and taking it into housing development as well. That increases the pool of resources. It brings regional banks more into play. It's very hard for a community the size of Lansing to do a whole lot by itself, but again, there's a critical mass formed by partnership, and we're all pretty much in a unified housing market. So that can do things like create one of my favorite tools, and that is a construction financing loan pool to allow a builder to build a critical mass of houses without mortgaging their kids to do that by using a pool of community-based money to finance those kinds of projects. We also think that the neighborhood revitalization initiative, which is tax abatement, has important advantages in targeted residential development as well. Finally, and this is something that is really not a capital expense, there's a lot of risk in regulation, in zoning, in subdivisions, in getting projects approved, and so doing things like looking at our zoning ordinances and seeing if there are any obstacles to building more diverse housing forms, requirements that don't really need to be there, that are presenting obstacles, that are maybe standards that are not all that useful in terms of benefits to the public, are all things that need to be looked at. Another thing that we're looking at, particularly in terms of higher density housing, are establishing specific areas where that will be permitted and specific design standards, which, if they're met, can get administrative approval rather than going through extensive site plan and zoning approvals. We think that it will be important to take a look again at the 2014 Comprehensive Plan, which is a nice document, but almost everything in it is designated for single-family development. So almost anything you build in those areas, if it's a higher density, will require a comprehensive plan amendment. So getting into those ideas of where and what criterion are useful for higher density development will also be important in terms of increasing the predictability of getting permission to build something. And finally, looking at some of the fees and some of the fee reductions that are applicable. So, for example, in infill areas, the fee reduction policy of the city right now caps things at $250,000. It'd be better just to remove the cap in those areas, because the more you invest in those, the better off we are. So different things that can reduce those risks. I think that town center is a very exciting opportunity for residential development. Was not the original intent of it, but it has the opportunity, particularly with the community colleges building, with some commercial, but has the opportunity of being the city center that Lansing really has never had. So we recommend a kind of more detailed master plan rather than just selling off those kinds of pieces to individuals who have projects that may or may not relate to other kinds of projects. And use as an example a area that we worked in recently in northwest Indiana. It's a town called Portage. It's in the Chicago metro area, about 40 miles away from Chicago, that basically built a town center using multifamily development. We could accommodate most of our multifamily market in this area, as well as providing a pedestrian activity, different types of housing types that might not be acceptable in more single-family kinds of neighborhoods, and using that nexus of people and activity and strategic location to really build something great. Finally, there are a variety of community amenities that can be included. Lansing has done a very, very nice parks master plan by a very good firm, Landworks, who we work with a lot. And I took in my spare time today, of which there was none, but took the liberty of trying to show how a first stage connected trail system could be built out of the proposals of both the Confluence and the Landworks studies, and really tie things together, serving the parks, the water park, the town center, and various other things together. Street connections, the town center area, the K7 corridor being another interesting possibility. We've been involved for years in the old Highway 6 corridor in Coralville, Iowa, that started the development of a new city center there by improving its commercial strip, and by taking a corridor that was far worse than you could even imagine. You can see pictures of it at the top, doing pedestrian activity, graphics, branding, trees, and using this a classy
Marty,
strip is worth the trip.
Off here in 1 minute.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
wrap it up.
And finally, a community marketing program that's aimed at existing residents, prospective residents, and focused on developers and builders. And then finally, a series of policies that relate to the east side neighborhoods and to neighborhood development in those areas. One of the more visionary, I guess, or difficult ones to do would be an east side trail connection, because those neighborhoods do not connect to one another or to City Park. So by building some bridges over the creeks and connecting trails, and that would have major benefits to the area. So with that, I apologize for talking so long.
That's all right. You're only a minute and a half.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to work with you. I hope you enjoy the document. I don't know if there's any time for Q&A, but
No, but we're going.
But you'll
once
read
we
it.
read the final product, we'll
Perfect.
certainly get back to you.
Okay, good.
On anything.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks
Thank
a lot.
you.
Ron.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
And there was no formal action necessary on that item. Item number 4 is Santa Fe Townhomes Phase 2 rezone. The applicant proposes to rezone the 1.8 acre tract from B3 to R4 and is proposing to develop the property as a continuation of the Santa Fe Townhomes. The Planning Commission voted 5-0 to recommend approval. So I need a motion to adopt ordinance number 1097 to amend the City of Lansing zoning map.
So moved.
I have a motion, a second, any discussion? So, come on, please state your name, because nobody knows you in here, Rick, and your address.
It's only been 5 years since I've been here. Rick Hune, 601 North 2nd Terrace, Lansing. I'm here tonight to speak against the rezoning of the Greenemeyer property on Santa Fe Street. Several members of our neighborhood are here tonight. There were couple of us here at the Planning Commission and spoke against the proposal for the following reasons. At present, there are 2 12-plexes with 24 families and 48 vehicles. He has built an additional 5 multiplexes with 14 families and 28 more cars. The last of the 5 units being built now under construction is facing Santa Fe Drive and is about 35 feet off the roadway. It is a 3-plex with parking for approximately 6 vehicles. What happens when one of the tenants or has company or he has more than 2 vehicles? Will they be able to park on Santa Fe, which is only about 16 feet wide? 2 cars can pass on Santa Fe, but that's about it. Is the city going to allow parking on Santa Fe, or are you going to prohibit parking on Santa Fe? We weren't allowed to know how many more units were being built or proposed because your lawyer wouldn't let a member of the Planning Commission ask that question. So I have to assume that he's planning on building a private road with an additional 10 or more 3-plexes for a total of another 30 plus more families and another 30 more cars. So that gives us about 68 families in a 100-yard section of street. How many is enough? How much is enough? Mr. Greenemeyer stated this would be a continuation of what is being built to the south, and in my opinion, he's building nothing but pure junk. These are small boxes, they are not pretty, and they are not cute, they are junk. They have the same basic floor plan as Lansing Heights, but they are a very poor version of Lansing Heights. In the city's comprehensive plan, this property is listed as B3 small business. I have been on 2 of these commissions as a member of the Planning Commission and as the fire chief, and I know how much work and study goes into making of these plans. The Greenemeyers obtained this property, if I remember correctly, several years ago in a trade with the city for ground they received for East Fairlane. I might be mistaken, but that's what I remember. Anyway, they received the ground and it was zoned B3 at that time, and it's been B3 ever since. I don't begrudge the Greenemeyers for wanting to develop this property, but why do we have to have the cheapest housing built in Lansing built there? We have lived in this neighborhood for 48 years. There are 3 original owners, 4 second owners, and it's a very stable neighborhood. The last 2 homes sold for over $225,000 plus, and the smallest of the 3 designs in our neighborhood. With the allowance of these new apartments, we feel that our property values will do nothing but fall. I ask you vote no on this rezoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
Mr. Mayor, if I may address the issue about the lawyer shutting them down. I run into this all the time.
Yeah.
They always want to discuss things that aren't appropriate for the Planning Commission. Just want to make the public aware that there are certain things that are discussed and things that are not. And that was issues that were not to be discussed at that particular meeting.
Right. Okay. Please come up and state your name and address.
Good evening. My name is Crystal Taylor. I live at 114 Fern Street, Lansing, Kansas. And I'm directly affected by the building of the townhomes because it is an eyesore. There was a beautiful forest, if you remember, before they bulldozed it all around. No need for that because they haven't even built anything on the forest that they destroyed. All the animals, deer, foxes, owls, yes. I wanted to be the Lorax out there while they were bulldozing it down for no reason. The whole reason our family picked that location was for the stability of homeowners, a great community, and then the quietness that that forest provided us, it's now gone. It does look absolutely tacky, and then the increase of traffic on that street, the lack of safety, there's no sidewalks at all in that area. Adding that many more people to our small area, how does that work? It doesn't make any sense at all. And also, when you look at the grading of said location where we want to continue building more, the amount of soil that they need to go dump in there, it's a flood zone. It is a complete swamp back there, and they should have known that before they tore down the forest unnecessarily. I beg you, for my future and my children's future, to not allow any more townhomes to be built in that area. There's plenty of other land to grow the Lansing community as we want to do that is already plowed. You don't have to take any trees down. That town center sounds great. All right, move it there. But please don't continue to build any more tacky townhomes that are going to lower our home values, increase more population without the means to sustain that population. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Was there anyone else? I saw some hands, so I just want to make sure I didn't skip anybody.
Hello, I'm James Andrews. I live at 118 Fern Street. I don't like what's going on down there, as I don't like the design. It looks tacky. My mom used to work as an apartment manager, so I've seen nice apartments and tacky apartments, and I don't think this is adding value to the area. Also, I'm concerned about the traffic because that is a school bus where my kids used to get on the bus right there, and I'm concerned that people will park on the street down there, clogging that and funneling it. And I second a lot of what Rick Hunn had to say too. So, thank you.
All right, thanks. We have one more.
Hello, Council. My name is Lee Shirley. I'm new to the area. I live at 220 Fern Street, Lansing, Kansas. And I'm very concerned about what's going on Santa Fe with the low-income housing units. Mainly, one of my biggest concerns is the traffic area. Another big concern is the low-income housing taking away from the value of our homes. And the traffic area, with the amount of people that will be moving in, I would say 2 cars probably per unit. So that's more than what Rick had indicated. And I just think it's a safety hazard, traffic hazard, and to remove a natural habitat to put in townhomes of that caliber, which is low-income housing. I don't have anything against low-income housing, but I do have an issue with it devaluating our homes. And I think that, like Crystal just mentioned, there are plenty other places that are already demolished for that kind of building. We don't need to take away a natural habitat that is enhancing the value of our homes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just kind of want to address the natural habitat thing. It's property owned by an owner. So, like, if you had 26 trees in your backyard and you wanted to cut them all down, that's up to you. Natural habitat are normally in the master plan as conservation areas that we would in the city plan for. Certain areas we don't want anybody to actually build in. So I'm not saying that wasn't a little haven, because it probably was, but it wasn't a designated city conservation area. I just want to make that public.
Excuse me, but with all due respect, I do believe that once you tear down a tree, you should plant a tree.
Yes.
Trees supply oxygen for our community.
And we are a Tree City, USA,
Yeah.
and we plant them every year. But thank you. I appreciate that. Okay.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
may I?
I mean, sure, you can come on up. The other thing I wanted to address was this is not low-income housing. It is market rate townhomes, so they're a little different. But Jeremy can probably address some of that.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. Ken, would you pull up the GIS map that we're discussing tonight? Okay. Yeah, so I'm here for a zoning hearing, but I do feel slightly compelled to address some of the folks or some of the comments in the crowd. We've met some of the things that people are noticing is probably because the place is still under construction. It's lacking landscaping. It's lacking sod. Final grades haven't been put on, so I understand why it might look like an eyesore right now, but we're not done. Through the process, we've met every city requirement during the development process. We've had no issues with your inspectors. And if there's anything that continues to happen, I mean, this seems like an issue for code enforcement, and I would actually encourage anyone to call code enforcement because we want it to look good as well. So, Ken, can you highlight the lot that we're talking about? Okay, sorry. Got it.
I can use a highlighter from here.
There we go. Thank you. So, yeah, there's a little bit of history with this lot, and I'm sure some of you will remember. I know you mentioned that this thing passed, more of my request, passed the Planning Commission meeting back on May 17th. There was also a prior attempt in 2021 to rezone this thing also to R4. That also passed the Planning Commission, unanimous 7-0. Ran into some problems with the City Council, the same body. Hopefully it was Zoom related. I don't know if those of you who remember having to have this conversation over Zoom a couple years ago. So as far as the zoning on this lot that we're talking about, even if I wasn't here requesting something for myself, I still think the zoning doesn't make any sense. It's currently zoned B3. In the history on that, when it was part of the Econo Lodge, I think B3 made sense. It was part of a lot that faced K7 and had a more commercial use. But using the definition from the city's Unified Development Ordinance of a B3 zoning, it says the intent of the B3 district is to provide for those commercial uses which are intensive in nature and require larger lots and direct access to major streets. The B3 district is most appropriate for automobile-oriented regional, commercial, and office development. So, for those of you who have been by the lot or seen pictures, does that lot meet any of these criteria? Large lot? I don't think so. It's sitting at 1.8 acres, and I don't consider that a large lot. Direct access to major street? Not at all. I don't think anyone would consider Santa Fe a major street. And automobile-oriented? There seems to be some real concern about traffic because the street is so small in such a neighborhood street that I don't think it meets any of the city's definitions of the B3 zoning. So, what is a good zoning? Typically in zoning, cities use, as you guys know, different zoning categories to have transitional zoning from agriculture on one end all the way to like heavy industry on the other end. And that's where we think this lot makes sense for a R4 zoning, which would put it right between the B3 to the west and the more residential uses and zoning to the east. Again, back to the city's UDO for the R4 zoning, which is what we're requesting. The intent of the R4 district is to provide for high-density residential development, including single-unit, two-unit, and multifamily residences in strong residential neighborhoods. And I think, as a lot of people who are in the crowd would agree, this fits the definition of a strong residential neighborhood. It's entirely a residential neighborhood, and our zoning provides the transition between the heavier commercial use and their houses. So what we're requesting is exactly what was requested and approved for the land that we're currently building on in 2017. It's also no different than the request that was made to this body back in May of this year by the folks who are interested in a housing development on Lansing Town Center, which was also unanimously passed. So, as a reminder, what's being determined tonight is the appropriateness of R4 zoning in this location. It's not about past projects. It's not about the types of tenants that are going to live here, the style of house, the rents that are going to be charged, or any amenities. It's about how appropriate is this zoning in this location. So I'll take any questions, or I can sit down.
Anybody have any questions for the chairman?
I don't, but I have a comment I'd like to make.
Yep.
When you live in this, not to you.
Yeah,
Chair,
okay.
So, but when you live in a city and you move into a lot that next door, you move into a house where there's a wooded lot next door. If I don't know that you should expect that to remain a wooded lot forever. It's privately owned by a businessman who's, Rick, as you acknowledged, is trying to make money. So my thing is, I guess, if the woods are that important to you, maybe you should have dug into it a little bit more. I don't blame Jeremy for wanting to, he's a businessman, and we can agree on that. But I think for people to expect that to remain a wooded area forever is not a reasonable expectation.
And you have to remember, it's zone B3 right now. So, in a real world, he could build storage units on that property and tear down the trees, right? And without the rezoning, right? And build whatever he wants to that way.
We've been hit with that before in Jeremy's grandfather, and I argued this years before. Businesses go home at 5 o'clock.
Not all of them.
At night, there's nobody out, whereas residences come home at 5 o'clock, and you got 50 kids, you got 68 families there. Business goes home at 5 o'clock.
Not every.
Like I say, we're not.
You could also have an automobile repair place there. There's a lot of businesses that could go in there that could be as disruptive, I guess.
Basically, what we're saying is, why is he built the duplexes like he built on Ivy Street?
So if we did that, you'd be happy.
Yeah, I would.
What's the difference?
I was going to say, from a zoning standpoint, that might be, well, maybe just to clarify one thing, and I don't want to speak for Greg, but I think at that planning commission meeting when he tried to veer the discussion away from a specific number of units, I think his goal was, when you rezone, you're just talking about land use. You're not talking about specific number of units. So I think that's probably why he said that. I think tentatively, I think they're thinking around 18 or 20 units or something like that. But again, that's tentatively. This is just looking at land use. And so again, I'm not sure, maybe we can double check really quick, but it's possible duplexes or triplexes would also meet R4 zoning. So this is purely land use. We're not talking about the paint color, the brick style, the roof pitch, or anything like that. This is just purely land use. And I think that's what was trying to be emphasized at that planning commission.
Jeremy's going to make money. He's got to make money. But what
Yeah.
he's built there is cheap.
One thing too,
We need.
Thanks. I heard from
That's
you.
your
So-
opinion.
One thing.
We're not going to get into back and forth.
Sorry.
What were you going to say?
I was just going to say procedurally, one other thing to keep in mind too, again, since this is more land use, there is still one more step beyond this. So it would go to the planning commission from a site plan standpoint. So if it is something that is objectionable to, the planning commission, they can evaluate that. If he's trying to put up a hot pink apartment complex, the planning commission can vote it down. So there's still one more step that would go to the planning commission to ensure it's, a quality unit. So,
Which means it meets our codes.
yes.
Just to-
outside of that,
just to
we really
emphasize-
can't say anything.
Mr. Mayor, just to emphasize to this council is that we don't want to get into the weeds of what could be based on our codes. This is like, Tim has said, this is entirely whether or not this would be an appropriate land use between a residential area and, and a commercial area. Is this what the UDO actually promotes? And I think the answer to that is yes, because it creates the buffer between a primary residential area to multifamily to commercial. But that's your decision. But what I don't want this council to do is to take into account things that aren't for consideration, and that is paint color, layout, because we're not there yet. So do not.
This is specifically to a piece of land being rezoned from one to another.
That's it.
That's all this vote is on, and I think we know that.
Well, I just want to make sure that we don't have discussion about sizes, units, cars, because that's not part of the zone.
Can we request that it be rezoned for agricultural use versus housing?
If you owned it, you could.
If I owned it.
I mean, unfortunately, it's the owner who would request the rezoning, not the community. Okay, so end of discussion. Everybody good anymore? Okay, so we have a motion to adopt ordinance 1097 to amend the city of Lansing zoning map. So we'll call a roll.
Mr. Garvey.
Yes.
Mr. Bueller.
Yes.
Mr. Clemens.
Yes.
Mr. Brungard.
Yes.
Mr. Studnicka.
No.
Mr. Kirby.
Yes.
Mr. Major.
Yes.
Motion passed. Item number 5 is approval of carpet bids for CED and PW offices. Below are the bids that were solicited. The 2 that were received were opened on June 29th, 2023. Citywide for $39,964.93, and Seaford's Flooring for $21,776.68. So I need a motion to accept a low bid of $21,776.68 and award the project to Seaford Flooring of Tonganoxie for the installation of the carpet per the bid specifications.
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Do you have any idea why the huge discrepancy there?
We de-scoped some stuff out of the project.
You did what?
We de-scoped some stuff out of the project.
No, I mean between the two.
Oh, no.
The 39 and the 21.
They looked at it differently, I suppose.
All right. I mean, carpet quality and all that's the same?
Yes, yes.
Okay, all right. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
If we'd like, we could go into a long discussion about
No.
it.
But Mike,
You're
what?
Carpet and the shade.
It's gray.
2 foot by 2 foot
You're
gray
free
carpet
to stay after
squares.
and explain that to Greg. Thanks.
But Mike, what I don't want is for you to have to come back now and see us because the trimming wasn't included, and this wasn't included, and that wasn't included, and so now we're going to have to vote to approve an increase in. We discovered there's rock underneath digging, and we need another. You know, I don't need Tony in here.
We made it very clear that this included the labor to move the furniture. And it was, they had to acknowledge that in the bid.
Yeah, it's all in the contract.
I got it. I read it.
Yeah.
I just.
All right. So I have a motion and a second to approve. Call the roll.
Mr. Garvey.
Yes.
Mr. Bueller.
Yes.
Mr. Clemens.
Yes.
Mr. Brungard.
Yes.
Mr. Studnicka.
Yes.
Mr. Kirby.
Yes.
Mr. Major.
Yes.
Motion passed. Reports. Anything from the division heads? Going once, twice. No. City attorney.
Nothing to report, Mayor.
Tim.
I have nothing.
Okay, we'll go around the horn. Jesse.
Thank you, Mr. Vandal.
Yes, thanks for the pool committee tonight, all the recommendations. It was awesome to see the pictures and the project that we're going to do. Thank you to everybody who showed up to voice their opinion about the project, the Greenmeyer project. We appreciate your opinion, even though things may have not went your way. Please come back to our meeting and just continue to voice your opinion. That's all I've got.
All right, thanks, Jesse. Greg.
Again, Rob, Chief, thanks for coming and explaining the ISO process and everything and how that works, because it was very clear. I mean, it cleared up a lot of things in my mind. Thank you. Marty, thank you for the housing study. Information, appreciate that. And again, the advisory committee for the pool, thank them for all the hard work that they put in, and I'm looking forward to hear their recommendations. And as Jesse said, thank you everybody for coming, because we do like hearing your opinions. That's all I have, Mayor.
Dan.
I'd like to echo what was said before with a special thank you for the chief and explaining the inner workings of the fire district. That's all, Mayor.
Gary?
Ditto on everything that's said, and Marty, I don't think you're crazy.
You're a minority.
Wait for me.
Okay, thanks, Don.
Yeah, ditto on previous comments, and I don't have any.
Dean?
I have a question for Mike.
Question for Mike.
Mike, when they get around to doing the replacement patches, are the neighbors going to be notified? Because the way I envision it, that road's going to have to be closed for a while.
As soon as we know, we'll talk to whoever we can talk to.
Okay. I don't want them to get hit with like they did originally, where they just went down the neighborhood and said, we're going to close your street for 11 days, which didn't happen. But I just want to be sure this time the neighbors, this should be a day job, and I envision that if you need to get in and out of there during the day, you're probably going to have to park somewhere else.
We'll work with the contractor to try to minimize the impact. Again, they're repairing what they didn't do correctly.
No, I understand. I'm just, as I was wondering about it today, I hope to let us know, and if we should expect the road to be closed for a day, we'll know that. Other than that, I don't have anything to do. Fellas, your candy's in a box in the garage. I just don't know which box in the garage it's in.
I knew we were missing something tonight.
Hey, before we get to Marcus, Jason, got a thing on the flags over at, did you get that at the city rec center? Like they're tattered. The U.S. flag and the Kansas flag are both tattered, at least according to whoever emailed me. So we need to take a look at that and take them down if that's the case. And Marcus.
Yeah, ditto what everybody said tonight. Rob, Chief, thanks. In the next session, can you add the okay, so what to the ISO saving? You know what I'm saying? How it impacts our pocketbooks. Because the fact that it's down at a 3 right now, and where it went from a 5 to a 3, because I was on that board, is a huge difference to people's pocketbooks. So that's adjourned for the next phase of briefings, is how that is so important to our city and businesses when those ISO ratings are so low, right?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. Thanks, I appreciate it. Thanks for the brief. Hey, Tim, one question. Country Club. What's going on?
Club is.
You know,
Rumors.
you're right, a lot of rumors, and the unfortunate thing is I don't know much more than the rumors either. I know Mr. Studnicka and I spoke about it a little bit. I reached out to the CEO. I called him, emailed him. He hasn't returned my phone calls or emails. You know, as far as I know, it's on the market. I don't
So it
know.
hasn't been sold. It's up for sale. The whole thing's up for
They got
sale.
all their kitchen equipment.
Yeah, I mean, they're selling their stuff on Facebook, so
You know,
that's an indicator that they're probably not going to be around long.
And unfortunately, I mean, again, they haven't reached out to the city at all. So I don't know anything more than you guys do. And the thing I'd say, though, I mean, that sometimes happens with businesses, like when Burger King shut down. You know, they didn't call us to tell us. But obviously, this is a lot bigger and a lot more prominent than that. But unfortunately, they haven't reached back out to us. So.
All right.
We'll keep trying.
Marty, thanks for the presentation. Pool committee, thanks. Appreciate it. And with that, Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. Call roll.
Mr. Garvey.
No.
No? Okay. Mr. Mueller?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Clemens?
Yes.
Mr. Brungard?
Yes.
Mr. Studnicka?
Yes.
Mr. Kirby?
In 14 minutes and 2 seconds, I'll say. Let's just go till 9:30. Yes.
Mr. Major?
Yes.
Meeting's adjourned, Mayor.
Yeah. I just wanted to stall a little bit. We're